This is the lecture for Module 5, Alcohol. This is part 2 of this lecture series. It's a 3-part lecture series. The topics for the whole series include an introduction, absorption, elimination, which was in part 1, acute and chronic effects, which is what we'll be talking about in part 2, and then the next lecture will be on the use and misuse of alcohol. So as alcohol is ingested and metabolized and processed in the body, it creates physical sensations as well as mental experiences that that describe intoxication or being impaired by alcohol. And that's what we'll be talking about in this lecture is the effects of alcohol on the body. And so at the level of 1 to 4 ounces per hour, you start to see an impact on the individual. So their judgment, their fine motor coordination, so being able to make decisions, their writing, how they handle keys, those things are starting to get impaired. They might also be experiencing some feelings of pleasure, happiness. They might be more talkative, a little bit more braggadocious or boastful at that level of alcohol ingestion. 4 to 12 ounces per hour, and you're starting to get an impact on walking and driving, muscle motor coordination, moving around. You start seeing someone sort of have a stagger when they walk, a slurred speech. You might see nausea or vomiting. At 12 to 16 doses per hour, the person is awake, but they can't respond. So you're not going to be able to get them into a car or walk to the bathroom. They're kind of conscious, but they can't really move. They might experience sensations of feeling too hot or too cold, but they're also kind of numb to other physical pain. So it is a very fine line between how you would describe someone as being drunk, like, oh, they're, that person's slurring their speech, and like, oh, maybe they puked, but they boot and rallied, so they're good to go, versus this person cannot respond anymore, their body temperature is dysregulated, and we're looking at coma and death. So you'll notice this is a 5-category description of impairment. Only the first 2 are fully conscious. And then the remaining 3, you're starting to see some real impact on the way the person's functioning. So acute effects of alcohol on the brain and behavior. And I apologize again, it looks like I'm using my the draft version of my slides. The information about sex comes later. But for now, we'll talk about alcohol and the impact that it has on you when you ingest it initially. So alcohol overall is a sedative, and sedatives suppress the central nervous system. So it sedates someone is the origin of that word. So it slows down the functioning of the brain, neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. It involves the neurotransmitters GABA and glutamate, which, if you'll remember from our brain chapter, these are the 2 most, they're not the most popular, they're the 2 most prominent neurotransmitters in the brain, and they're the go, no-go neurotransmitters. So they really, the GABA is the no-go, which means that if GABA is released, it tells neurons not to fire, versus glutamate, which is the go neurotransmitter, it tells neurons to fire. And so alcohol affects both of these in a way that reduces the amount of neurons firing. So it increases the amount of GABA, no go. It makes more of that. So it's saying don't fire neurons. And it also decreases glutamate, which is the go neurotransmitter. So it says we don't need as much of that. It slows down brain activity. with alcohol, you also see an impact on dopamine, which it just initially increases the bioavailability of dopamine, but only in that initial euphoric period. Experiencing that kind of pleasant, buzzed, tipsy feeling only happens initially. Um, and uh, Otherwise, what ends up happening is that the impact on GABA and glutamate start to have more global effects on the brain. And so there you lose that concentration of sensation related to dopamine because it's lost to this global effect that alcohol is having on the body. So it doesn't stimulate that pleasure circuit the way other drugs do. And so to some degree, alcohol is has less addictive potential than drugs like heroin, cocaine, or methamphetamine, which we'll talk about later. Hangovers are experienced as alcohol is being broken down by the liver. So again, that substance that the liver breaks turns alcohol into before it's ultimately metabolized, that substance is so toxic that it also starts to create hangover effects. And once that process of breaking down alcohol starts to occur, there's no reversing it or making it get better. And so, really, the only cure for a hangover is preventing it from happening in the first place, which means consuming alcohol at a rate that your liver can keep up with so you don't experience the negative effects of the byproduct that your liver creates when it's breaking alcohol down. Another a sort of general tip is to avoid coffee for hangovers or anything that is further dehydrating, because that is another big component of why people experience hangovers. Alcohol also has an effect on memory. So, because of that suppression of the glutamate activity, the GO receptor, that has a big impact on the firing of neurons in areas of the brain related to memory. And so, it specifically impact new memory formation via the NMDA receptor, which is located I'm pretty sure in the hippocampus, but I'll post something to verify that. But this is what explains people having difficulty remembering when they are very intoxicated from alcohol. So having black or brownouts or having sort of something in between. It's the really ultimately comes down to the suppression of the GO neurotransmitter, that glutamate transmitter that really tells neurons to fire. If their neurons aren't firing, memories aren't being formed. Chronic exposure to alcohol really depends on the amount of alcohol that's being consumed, and the research is still out on what the line is between um, uh, light or moderate drinking and heavy or immoderate drinking. Um, there is some evidence that the brain tissue shrinks over time with long-term alcohol use. Um, but that if alcohol then is stopped, there is some degree of recovery in terms of that brain tissue. But there then still can be some lasting impact. So the debate is still out there. I mean, with uh, chronic alcohol use, ultimately you can recover some of your brain functioning back from chronic alcohol use and the damage done to it, but it's only to a limited degree. Um, and this is especially true related to the frontal lobe. And so there is, it used to be like a sort of slang word was wet brain for someone who is a chronic alcohol user, and their ability to um, engage with executive functioning. So decision making, planning, purposeful goal directed behavior, that all's impacted pretty severely with someone who drinks alcohol chronically. And again, you can see the shrinkage of the frontal lobe with chronic alcohol use. Someone who stops drinking might be able to gain some of that back, but there still is going to be some long lasting damage from chronic alcohol use. It can also impact the brain structures used for memory, as we mentioned a moment ago, and the continual use of alcohol will continue to impact those memory parts of the brain. Um, and then even in animal studies, in terms of chronic exposure to alcohol, sometimes brain damage occurs after just one episode of very heavy binge drinking. So when we were looking at that chart for level of impairment, again, that line between someone who's drunk but conscious and someone who is lost conscious and is on their way to death and dying, essentially, is a very fine line. And if someone, at least in animal studies, if animals are given a large enough dose of alcohol, even as a first alcohol use, there can be brain damage that occurs as a result of that. And it's due to the alcohol shutting down those parts of the brainstem that are associated with, uh, oxygen regulation and blood flow. So then you start to see damage occurring to the body because the brain isn't functioning the way it should. And so that's important to consider for adolescents whose brains may still be developing, adolescents and young adults, and also who might be experiencing or being exposed to alcohol for the first time, and just what the impact of heavy or binge drinking is on the developing brain. Alcohol also has an impact on the mental functioning of the user. So, again, that memory difficulty forming new memories, but again, with a sort of constant suppression of neuron firing in the brain, you can also see some damage in terms of storing long-term memories. Uh, you see some deficits in abstract thinking, some problem solving, attention and concentration. These are all related to the frontal lobe. So, in terms of abstract thinking, someone being able to think about concepts versus something that's really more concrete and objective. So, metaphors would be an example of abstract thinking versus being told flat out the truth about something is more concrete thinking. People who drink a lot of alcohol lose that ability to abstract. There's some deficits related to problem solving, some flexibility or creativity related to solving problems, that kind of lateral thinking or workaround solutions, creative solutions to problems, that's diminished. Attention and concentration on challenging tasks or even daily tasks like driving a car, just having a harder time focusing. And then also, there you can see some impact on the perception of emotion in others. And so, difficulty with perspective taking or understanding somebody else's emotional experience, which may relate to and contribute to some of the relationship issues that people who chronically use alcohol find themselves in. All right, and that's it for part two. Stick around for part three.